Welcome to the Citizens Reporter. I'm your host and editor, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to the new year 2020. Now, to help me with this week's news is one of our regular citizen reporters, Mr. Mark Bradley. Thank you, Mr. Bradley, for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'd like to put up Nina Clifford to replace that Kathleen Rockwell, who actually her nickname was Klondike Kate. And the difference is that when you take a look at the two, first of all, Nina Clifford has this history that was in Minnesota for the longest period of time, and during when it had its growth, and a lot of things were happening here. So she was very instrumental. She had 2 residences that she created, actually 3, because she had a house that was next to one of the 2 businesses she owned.
But now, Mr. Bradley, before we get too much into the history of all of this, you know, some of our viewers may not have gone to the Winter Carnival. They may not be aware of the Winter Carnival actually occurring each winter in St. Paul, that it is a regular, customary celebration that goes on, and that they have various characters that people portray from past people in the community. And so that's really what you're talking about, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, and so tell us a little bit about some of the characters that are part of this celebration, and then that will lead us just automatically into talking about Klondike Kate, who is one of those characters, correct?
Right. Well, we have King Boreas and the Queen of the Snows, and then of course we have the east, west, and north and south winds, and those characters happen to play different roles. And then, of course, we have the one who's supposed to destroy the Winter Carnival every year, and that's the Vulcans. Now, these are characters to celebrate having fun during the winter time, and that's what they were created by James J. Hill to do when he was trying to get people to come to Minnesota as he built the railroad tracks from the East Coast to the West Coast. And the fact is that he wanted to have it where people would have a celebration, so he built these castles and had the characters actually pretend to be living in the castles during the period of time of the Winter Carnival. They'd go for celebrations, and they even had banquets in some of the castles. Though that was kind of dangerous, so they've kind of quit that at this point.
And keep in mind, I think what you're referring to is that it was, again, every year a castle, an ice castle would be built. Of course, depending upon how much money was in the kitty to build it and what the plans were, there's been all types of castles over the years.
Right.
I remember once upon a time, maybe 28 years ago or thereabouts, there was this one fabulous castle that was out by Lake Phalen there, and it was all lit up with different colored lights, and there were cars that would be streaming by to be able to see it. But it was also, I think, one of the most expensive castles that they ever did. And I don't think that they've really gone quite that extravagant since then.
Well, they did have 2 other castles that were comparable and almost as expensive.
Oh,
one
really?
was on Harriet Island, and the other one happened to be in Lake Phalen. And then they had some smaller ones, including one that was in Mounds Park.
Oh, really? Okay.
So they've had quite a history with those. But they had this one lady that was supposed to be the good time lady that basically she was supposed to be singing and dancing at the bars, and that was Klondike Kate.
Right, so that's the character Klondike Kate, and I know that in the past you've kind of referred to her and talked to her, and you were thinking that maybe she was a fictional character, but now in looking at some of the research, you find that this is really based on a real person, correct?
Right, and it was a person that was actually spending her time trying to get into the Yukon area up there in Alaska where the gold was at the time that the gold rush was, and she ended up having about 4 or 5 different husbands over the period of time that she lived. And she just basically was a person that liked to have a good time up there. But we had somebody that was here, I think, that was very much more instrumental to the state and to growth and excitement here.
Right.
But also she
And-
built a lot of different things that people don't realize. I think that she really epitomizes what the Winter Carnival should be embracing.
Right, and just for our viewers to share a little bit of Mr. Bradley's research, the original Klondike Kate is Kathleen Eloise Rockwell, who was born in 1873 and passed away on February 21st, 1957. So she was actually quite old when she passed away. But she was an American dancer and vaudeville star during the Klondike Gold Rush. And that's when she met various people who helped her in her motion picture attempts. And she was originally born in Kansas, moved to North Dakota, and as Mr. Bradley indicated, eventually ended up in Alaska in 1899. And that she first worked as a tap dancer, and then she also tried to get, as Mr. Bradley indicated, into the movies, but she had a few movies that she was in, but she was unsuccessful. But in this whole thing, it doesn't really say that she ever really spent much time in Minnesota, that it
Right.
was really in Alaska, I mean, where she got that name, Klondike
Right.
Kate, because of the gold rush that was going on. And so what you're proposing is that rather than perhaps that we really should be transferring that name, Klondike Kate, in the Winter Carnival sense,
Right.
over to
Nina Clifford.
to Nina Clifford, who was a person who was in St. Paul at that time. She was a madam. She had several houses of ill repute. And it says in this particular article that it was not uncommon that she was frequently in court as the madam of those houses, and that she was fined, and that generally speaking at that time the fines were effectively a licensing fee. So it wasn't the type of thing that she was being fined because she was necessarily a crime and she was going to go to jail, but it was basically a fine that she had to pay so she could remain in business.
Right.
And as we've covered on these programs before, Mr. Bradley has shared some of the history of early St. Paul, where she was very instrumental in setting up places for the homeless or for children that didn't have a home to live, so that way that they had a place that they could have food and shelter.
Plus, also, she was supposed to be one of the major funders, her and her girls, for the cathedral. So the orphanage was supposed to be on West 7th. They don't really, when I try to find out where it is, nobody seems to know exactly where it is. But I think the church and the city fathers do know. The men's club, now I believe it's a restaurant over there by the, it was, I believe it was Minnesota Men's Club. They actually turned their billiard room into the Nina Clifford room. So the fact is, they had quite a bit of respect for this young lady when she was young, and she did live here for quite a period of time.
Right, and it does say here, just as for our viewers, a little background on her. She was widowed in 1886 at the age of 35. So
Right.
think about it, back then, what is a woman who's 35 years old, what the heck is she to do? Well, anyway, what she did, she moved to St. Paul. And in 1887, she bought 2 building lots in Washington Street opposite the city morgue and the police station. So you see, she was right across from where the police were. They certainly knew what was going on. She had 2 red brick buildings built, and she lived in one, and she started a brothel in the other. And it says that this was one of the most upmarket brothels in St. Paul and employed the best girls. The interior of the house was well appointed with plush furnishings and marble fireplaces. And then it said that the business was good. And in 1895, the records show that Clifford employed 11 prostitutes and 3 servants, and a musician as well was included in 1900. And then it says by the 1920s, the brothel needed 2 telephone lines. So she actually had telephone lines installed, and she was known to accept diamonds in payment from clients, and she was reputed to have several hundred uncut diamonds. So anyway, in the end, she died of a stroke on July 14th, 1929 at the age of 78.
And the thing that article did not mention is that she did also have that second brothel that was built up on Summit Avenue. That was right down from many of the movers and shakers of the Twin Cities area at that time. So it's kind of intriguing, and I think that having that honesty kind of brings a little bit more intrigue to anybody who wants to come to the Winter Carnival for the next time, because we're not talking about some fictitious character anymore. We're talking about some real things. And all the characters that run through the Twin Cities, I think that that's something we have to look at.
So now, Mr. Bradley, do you have any idea how long the Winter Carnival generally runs?
It depends upon how much money they physically have and the events they can create from year to year. But it used to run for the period of about 2 to 3 weeks, and it's now more dependent upon their financing, because they have shut it down for a couple of years in a row, especially after they built their last major castle.
I've got a friend of mine that has one of those buttons that you can purchase to enter the activities, and I think he's got a button for every year that it ever occurred. So there are some loyal followers who go to it.
Oh yes, and as far as those buttons are, that's in conjunction with St. Paul Pioneer Press, because they also fund the medallion search.
Oh yes.
So that's one of the functions there.
Now what's next? What's next, Mr. Bradley?
Well, because we still have a couple of Appliance Smart facilities in the Twin Cities area, including one in Maplewood. They are now going through Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So it's just information on them that they are still in existence and functionally operating, but they are having difficulties at this point.
And in this particular company, Appliance Smart, the one that's in Maplewood is in the Birch Run shopping center up by the Maplewood Mall. So if you know where the Joanne Fabrics is, that's the same strip mall, the Birch Run shopping center.
Right.
And it says here that they are filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, that they have 3 locations, 2 in Minnesota and 1 in Ohio. So I guess we'll have to see how that all shakes out. But maybe if you're looking for a new appliance, maybe you can head over there. Maybe they have a bankruptcy sale going on.
Now, the next article I have here is something that happens to do with betting big on rapid rides. This is December 24th. I wanted to get the appropriate date on it. So it's talking about betting big on rapid transit. I believe it's in the Minneapolis Tribune. I should double check that. Yep, it is in the Minneapolis Tribune on the 24th of this last year. And if you get a chance to, it's worth taking a look at, because of what they're really saying is that they are betting big on these specialty locations at the expense of what we already have because of...
And what you're talking about are BRT lines, bus rapid transit lines, as these specialty lines. Because in reality, a BRT is simply just another bus. It's though that it's got a dedicated lane, that it has fewer stops on it than a regular bus. But some would argue, really, in many ways, how is it much different than the express bus that rides along the shoulder of an interstate or some other transportation corridor?
So I think the biggest difference I've noticed when I've gone to these meetings, and I have gone to the meetings, is that it is where you're getting off and getting on the bus, and that they have these way stations you're supposed to stop at for being catching the bus at. So they're spending a lot of money that we weren't spending before. And that means that what you're really doing is what we've been making an issue of is they're taking a lot of transit off of the roads. And they did that in Maplewood, where they did take the White Bear Avenue bus off until I kind of was making an issue that how can you say that we need more mass transit when you just canceled the White Bear Avenue transit? All of a sudden, that bus came back. Oh.
Well,
But the reality is, in truth, most of these bus lines have disappeared over the period of time, and it's because the buses themselves are expensive and the ridership is expensive. So if we're carrying the cost, and there is even one proposal in the State House right now, that they want to go with people riding for free on the buses. It means that you as the public are picking up the cost. I would like to have a little honesty and sincerity on the part of our politicians. I actually think that bus service and proper bus service is tantamount to actually keeping the city vital. But the reality is also that when we're looking at it, when we're doing these fluff type projects, they spend so much money, especially the BRT, and if they end up abandoning them within 6 to 8 years, and that's what I'm looking at for the two proposals of the bus rapid transit in Maplewood, that they're going to cost us so much and nobody's going to ride them, that they're going to be abandoned in 6 to 8 years.
And the cost-benefit analysis is your point, is the cost-benefit analysis may not work out for that big gamble. And this particular article, this is specifically what they say with regard to the bus ridership being decreasing over the years, is that there has been a persistent decline due to many reasons. And certainly it's been like around 5% every year, including road construction, okay? So let me ask you this, Mr. Bradley, how is a BRT line going to have any impact on road construction? Either the road construction happens or it doesn't.
Right.
Unless, of course, you decimate Bruce Vento Trail, which there won't be any road construction there. So that, of course, is why I guess they feel that that will help to overcome that reason why people aren't riding the bus. Another thing is cheap gas prices that coax car owners to drive. Well, there you go. I think a lot of people would say, well, if the gas prices are cheaper, they have the freedom then to be able to come and go as they please. I think that's one of the biggest objections I hear with people when they're making their choice between a bus or a car, is either the length of time it takes to get somewhere on the bus versus not having the flexibility and the independence that you have with a car.
But did you really pay attention to what's happening in our nation's capital as well as into our state capital right now? They're both institutions are arguing over the fact they have to find new ways of revenue, because the fact is gas is not becoming as sustainable for road construction anymore, because so many people are going to electric cars.
Oh.
So the reality is that...
So what you're saying is that the charging the gas tax is not necessarily going to be a sustainable source of money for repairing the roads, because there's fewer, that as time goes on and more electric cars come online, there's going to be less consumption of gas to produce that gas tax, right?
Right. In fact, if you really take a look at, our politicians have been so, how should I say, ostrich-wise with their heads in the ground, that they haven't looked at the real issues that are out there. First of all, we have transit, that we have to bring our materials into wherever we're going. And we can use several different sources right now, but without being honest with any of them, nothing's being improved at this point. At the same time, because we are running them on our regular roads with the trucks that we're using, they're over our interstates, it's destroying our roads at a faster rate. It also is making it so encumbered that it's hard to get to where you want to, especially during rush hour periods, because the fact is that you're competing with all the other traffic that's on the road. So
But that
we
brings,
are not
but that-
addressing this.
But right, and Mr. Bradley, that brings it to the point of that's very important in all of this is that wherever you're putting those bus routes or the BRT routes, you have to put them where the congestion is.
That's right.
You have to put them where the population is. You have to put them where the need is because that is what you're addressing. Now, for instance, on the Bruce Vento Trail, the Rush Line, where is the congestion on Highway 61? What are they relieving when it comes to congestion in going from Union Depot in St. Paul to White Bear Lake? Where is the congestion? Well, there might be congestion on 35E, but they could have certainly have run the BRT either north and south along Highway 61, which is parallel to 35E, or they could have actually probably connected it up with 35E like they are on 94 between Woodbury and Union Depot.
Right.
And run it along the frontage road or run it along on the shoulders. And so you see there are a lot of things, but we're way past that because they've already done their alternative routes, and all of those routes that are on major thoroughfares were all knocked off in favor of decimating the Bruce Vento Trail, which is an ecological gem where people use that for walking and biking, and the animals use it as a pathway to get to different watersheds between Maplewood, North St. Paul, and White Bear Lake. So you see, while we've gone past them designating the proper route, I think it's important to point out to our viewers that they had that chance to pick the proper route, and they just simply did not.
Well, politicians like to waste money. We know how that very well in Maplewood because of we have another issue that was in the latest Maplewood Living that talks about their newest waste of money, and of course, I would like to point out that among other things, they had just opened up their Wakefield Community Building that has just opened up.
Okay, so to be clear with our viewers, because so that they see where you're tracking,
Right,
is that Maplewood had a Maplewood Community Center.
right,
And it had meeting rooms in it,
Right.
which Maplewood customarily used for their annual State of Maplewood luncheon or breakfast that would be held every year in January for the last 6 or so years or so.
Right.
Okay. And then, but in the meanwhile, Maplewood basically gave the use of that building to the YMCA. So the YMCA
with no restrictions. They had no restrictions.
And
because if they
Maple-
had restrictions to use the building, there'd be no issues.
Well, what they did is that they gave the YMCA exclusive use of the building.
Right.
An exclusive use of deciding how to rent the rooms.
Right.
And Maplewood was granted a certain number of days during the year that they could use a meeting room in that building.
Ah,
So it may be that the State of Maplewood Luncheon is using up one of those days, but your point is this, is that Maplewood City Hall decided to spend $2.5 million
there it is.
to build the Wakefield Community Room, and if they really wanted to show off their Wakefield Community Room, they would be having their State of Maplewood Luncheon and mayoral address at their brand new building.
Right.
But we know, and they know, that the acoustics in that particular new building that they spent $2.5 million on, that the acoustics are crap. And if they were to have all of their buddies and all their politician buddies and all their other nonprofit buddies that are all going to this luncheon, because that's generally all that shows up are the city staff and all the other government buddies from other entities and agencies, they would determine that they couldn't hear very well because the acoustics are bad there. So they have to go back to the Maplewood Community Center and use up one of their allotted meeting days that they have under their contract with the YMCA. So that's interesting that you bring that up, Mr. Bradley, about that irony between the two buildings and the actions of Maplewood City Hall. Now, here's the other thing about this article that's written by the current mayor of Maplewood, who, by the way, is just simply appointed.
Right.
She indicates how happy and excited she is about the opening of the beautiful lakefront community gathering space at Wakefield Park. Doesn't that make it sound like you want to go there and gather? But keep in mind, you can only gather there and use that building if you pay the rental fee. It's not free for the public to go there and gather and have a community gathering place. No, it's a pay-to-play place. So there you go. So much for community.
Right.
We do talk about affordable housing on this program quite often, and between trying to figure out how to have it appropriately dispersed throughout the entire metro, not
Right.
just concentrated and centered in East St. Paul or Maplewood, but to have it distributed throughout the whole entire metro area. That's supposed to be part of the role that the Metropolitan Council plays, is that when they're reviewing the comprehensive plans and setting these aspirational housing goals for each community in the affected metro area, that they're doing so with that in mind, that they are dispersing it throughout the whole entire metro. Now, there is certainly a need for affordable housing, and that of course means housing that the rents are below market rate.
Right.
So in order to have rent below the market rate, it means that somewhere along the way there's been a subsidy. Now, that subsidy could have occurred at the construction phase as the form of a TIF, a tax increment financing, so that way the developer was able to benefit from that type of structuring of the finances. Or it could be that there are certain credits or finances that come from the federal level, the state level, the county level, where those monies go into the project. Or it could simply be that later on, once the project is built, that the project qualifies for various different voucher programs, in which case the people then who are living there have to meet certain financial requirements in order to get the reduced rent, which then is then also subsidized as some voucher program through a governmental entity. So you see, that's the affordable housing that you're talking about, correct,
Right.
Mr. Bradley?
Exactly.
And we have, of course, looked at this from many different angles, in that it's important that any community has a good variety of all types of housing stock, so that you've got a mixture between the high end and the voucher housing, but that you don't just get stuck with voucher housing. Now, Mr. Bradley, while we were on our holiday break, I was doing some reading in a commercial real estate magazine, and I found something that I thought you and the viewers, especially those people who are interested in the future trends of affordable housing, what is the future trend for warehousing the poor? Now, here's the question that I have always posed, is that if we were to spend as a country a lot of our effort and time and energy, and our politicians' brainwaves, on how to make our country competitive with the rest of the world, so that we could have good paying, sustainable jobs to employ more people at higher wage levels, because they are working jobs that are earning those higher wage levels. If we did that, we wouldn't have such a concern over how are we going to house the poor, because the poor would be not necessarily poor, they'd be the middle class.
Right.
And so that's the question. Well, in essence, it's easier to figure out solutions on how to warehouse the poor than it is on how to employ the poor. So let's take a look at our first clip, which is from a video of a new concept that I think that you are going to be shocked at when we take a look at it.
Right now in the United States, because of the trade and economy, we are a country that gets a lot of imports. And so right now, currently, there's over 1 million containers laying idle. So one of the most attractive things about cargo architecture is savings, time and money. You know, when we start comparing apples to apples, and it's not really apples to apples, it's like comparing an apple to a hot dog. It's a food group, but it's completely different. So you've still got your line items on your construction cost, and the only significant change is in your framing costs. That's anywhere from 8 to 11% on your actual framing costs that you'll save by using a container. You are reducing your carrying costs, and you're also reducing theft on site. You'd have less exposure to all of the catastrophic and expected thefts, you know, weather, delays, all those things. So you're reducing a lot of those soft costs that we don't often think about. And then the most important one is, in addition to your carrying costs, you're in revenue that much faster. So if we're cutting a project down by 1 year. So let's say it's supposed to be 18-month build time if you were to build it traditionally frame and stick built. We're cutting that down to 6 to 8 months. So let's say you're getting another year of rents. Holy smokes. Add that into your triple net and you're saving 23-26% on.
Mr. Bradley, cargo containers. Those are those containers that they put on ships that transport goods across the ocean. So if you think of those pictures you've seen where you're at a port and there's a big ship and it's got all these cargo containers and the big crane that's picking up one and pushing it over here and picking up another one and putting it on the ship, that's what she's talking about. She's talking about cargo containers. She says we have 1 million cargo containers that aren't being used. So, since they're not being used, let's just put the poor in cargo containers and have them live in cargo containers. Now, in a particular article about this new trend, that, by the way, is taking place south of the line of snow. If you think of it in the United States and where the snow doesn't fly anymore, basically anywhere south of the snow line is where this trend is developing, that the poor are going to be warehoused in cargo containers. It says here that there are about 8 million struggling American households that spend more than half of their income on rent or live in inadequate conditions. This 1 million cargo containers, by the way, Mr. Bradley, would take care of 1 million of those 8 million people, those 8 million households. Think of it. We could have them living like sardines in cans.
Right.
Amazing. And not only that, you heard the financial benefits of this particular trend, that it will decrease the amount of constructing housing for the poor by 25%. And you will be able to cut the time that you have gotten the project up and running by like 50%, and you will be able to collect rents that much sooner. Imagine that. Oh, this is amazing. And not only that, they call it sustainable. Now, this is one of those buzzwords that we bring up on these programs over and over again about how it is misused, abused, and actually means nothing at all anymore. This is an excellent example that having people living in cargo storage containers is sustainable. Now, of course, their little model they had there on that video makes it look like, well, maybe it could be kind of smart and trendy. Well, let's see what they say about that.
And in addition to that, it's really cool. We get a lot of millennials. It hits a nerve in sustainability and in the cool factor. Biggest challenges right now is the mindset, getting people to pull the trigger and to actually build with containers. The other biggest challenge that we've had, and we're able to navigate through it, is with your municipalities. Building codes, again, haven't kept up with product. And you don't open up the code book and say, well, for a 2-hour fire rating with corrugated steel, that's 8 gauge or 18 gauge, you use this product and this product. So we've had to go and create different assemblies for construction. And we go and we have to educate the municipalities, our building and departments, building and safety departments, and then the planning departments. So it's actually, I think, education. It's all about perception. As people get excited about it, I think that the upcycling of the containers and fulfilling the needs for the affordable housing piece is going to be a good challenge. It's a great challenge. I believe that the more we cookie cut this in a factory, I believe the cost per square foot will significantly decrease. We have numbers and we know that we're able to get all in, foundation, soup to nuts, to the key in the door for under $90 a square foot. And that's in a shortened time. But we have to have the infrastructure and the demand in place.
In this one particular article, it says, by using the average cost per day on the construction site of $5,000 and average rents in Atlanta and Dallas, this is where you're generally finding this right now, that it's calculated that money from both time savings and rent revenue, saving about 240 days on the construction timeline and gaining 240 days of rent added up to an estimated $2.2 million for the studio project. Now, you saw in that video exactly how these containers stack up. Now, while this might be an innovative idea on how to use all these empty, unused storage cargo containers, it makes me wonder what happened to all the mobile home parks in the United States.
And
now, that was the affordable housing model that we had,
Right.
and gave people more space in which to live. It was affordable, and yet they were disfavored. And they were, in many communities, basically eliminated, and that the push was to get rid of mobile home parks. Now, this is proposing that people live in storage containers. Every container is the same size.
Right.
It's the same uniformity. That's why they stack so perfectly. I mean, you noticed in that diagram, they showed how they could stack them 3, 4 cargo storage units high, and then they could fill the whole block up with them, just like Lego blocks.
Right.
Yes, they're uniform, they're easy to build with, you just cut the little holes out for the windows, and I guess you're good to go. Once you put in the interior siding and the wall paneling or whatever, and the carpet. But think about how much space does that give a family, a growing family? Is that the public policy that we want to create, that everybody is living in the same size unit, and that is all that they have available to them? So you see, there's a lot of public policy questions here that this raises, and what we hear from this video is basically the financial reasons behind it that support it, but what are the public policy issues? Now, there's one last piece of this video. Let's take a look.
Now, this is a different language in architecture, and this is a different language in construction, period. We are a disruptive technology, and we are totally disrupting the way things have been done. If I had a nickel for every time I've heard from a general contractor or a developer, well, you know, we've only done it this way and this is the only way we're going to do it, I tell you, I'd be driving my little Ferrari right now. We don't challenge ourselves. We're not challenging ourselves to be better and do better and build better. We're building the houses to last the length of the mortgage. We fly people to the moon, and we can actually send them back here in the United States, but we can't build a house that's going to last more than 40 years and to be energy efficient. We have got to change that, and that's, I think, the biggest reason we're, you know, really now shifting into the developer market. We need to disrupt it.
In Minnesota, I do believe that we are building houses that last longer than 40 years.
Right.
And I don't know where that figure comes from, but when I initially saw that first view that they showed in that clip of all of the containers all lined up together, not finished, and just their little blocks, you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of the housing made of concrete that I saw when I was in communist China, and that I saw when I was in communist Romania. And it was it looked exactly the same way, except that it was made of concrete rather than storage containers.
Well, it kind of reminded me of my dad decided not to get buried when he passed away. He took cremation, and they have what they call a mausoleum wall. And it kind of reminded me of a mausoleum wall there. But the reality is that prefabrication homes have the same advantages as these would. In fact, they'd be faster because of a prefabricated home would be done in a factory, and then they ship them in. And my brother had a prefabricated house that was done on his lot.
And they're going to say, Mr. Bradley, but the problem with those homes is that you can't stack them. How are we going to stack them so that we can have them stacked 4 or 5 high?
Well, because if he had a multi-storied house, it was stacked, and the reality was that because it was designed with the plumbing and everything in there, it landed right in the perfect areas, and everything. The holes were open for anything that had to be piped or electricity, so you didn't have to cut holes into a container. And
now, next we have a clip from the first meeting of the year from the Ramsey County Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Now, the reason that we're going to play this is so that you see that, first of all, the county commissioners of Ramsey County, not only do they wear the hat of being the county commissioner, but they also wear the hat of being on the HRA authority. And a lot of the housing programs and the push for affordable housing and initiatives for affordable housing that happen in Maplewood are as a result of what's being pushed out from Ramsey County. So it's important for you to know who is your HRA in Ramsey County. So this is their first meeting of the year. They have, of course, a large budget. They have programs. They have initiatives. You would think that for the first meeting of the year that it might be at least an hour long so they could talk about their roadmap for the coming year. But this meeting is only about 4 minutes long. 4 minutes long, and probably half of that time is involved in either taking a roll call to see who's present or to take a vote. So let's take a look and find out the business of the Ramsey County HRA, their first meeting in January, and you're going to be able to hear who the new officers are for the year.
The Housing and Redevelopment Authority meeting to order. Welcome all of you to our organizational meeting. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Roll call, please.
Roll call first. Look at the agenda.
Thank you.
Okay, roll call.
Carter.
Here?
Fretham.
Here.
Mas Castillo.
Here.
McDonough.
Here.
Ortega.
Aye.
Reinhardt.
Here.
McGuire.
Here. Now I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any comments? Clerk will take the roll.
Okay, Carter.
Yes.
Fretham.
Yes.
Modis Castillo.
Yes.
McDonough.
Aye.
Ortega.
Aye.
Reinhardt.
Aye.
McGuire.
Aye. And we have the minutes from the August 13th meeting, which was our last meeting, are presented for approval. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any further comments? The clerk will take the roll.
Carter.
Yes?
Fretham.
Yes.
Modis Castillo.
Yes.
McDonough.
Aye.
Ortega.
Aye.
Reinhardt.
Aye.
McGuire.
Aye. And our
Eyes all. Gee whiz, you know, if we counted up how many eyes there were in a whole couple of minutes there, we'd be astounded and thinking that they'd accomplished a lot. But basically all they did was to approve the agenda
And say they're there.
and approve the minutes from, did you hear, Mr. Bradley? The last meeting was August
That's what I was going to ask about.
13th, 2019. So it's been a few months since their last meeting. And since this is the organizational meeting, you would think that there might be some discussion about what had occurred since the last meeting in August. Because it's been a few months, there's probably something that's gone in housing and redevelopment in Ramsey County and their initiatives, at least an update on their various programs and what's occurred since then and how they're meeting their goals and those kinds of things, since it is an organizational meeting. But let's take a look at our next clip and find out what is on the agenda.
the item is the election of officers for 2020. And we are first going to elect the chair.
Madam Chair, I would put in the nomination for Commissioner Mattis Castillo to be HRA Chair for 2020.
And Madam Chair, I'd like to second that motion.
All right, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. And no further nominations. Clerk will take the roll.
Okay, Carter.
Yes.
Fretham.
Yes.
Modis Castillo.
Yes.
McDonough.
Aye.
Ortega.
Aye.
Reinhardt.
Aye.
McGuire.
Aye. Okay, and now we want to elect the vice chair.
Madam Chair, I would like to nominate Commissioner Victoria Reinhardt to Vice Chair of the HRA.
I'll second that motion. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any further comments? Please take the roll.
Carter.
Yes.
Fretham.
Aye.
McDonough.
Aye.
McGuire.
Aye.
Ortega.
Aye.
Reinhardt.
Aye.
Modis Castillo.
Aye.
Congratulations. And now we have the election of the secretary.
Madam Chair, I'd like to nominate Commissioner Carter to be the Secretary of the HRA.
Second.
Lots of seconds.
There's lots of seconds, right? We're not letting,
All of them.
it's been moved and seconded. I want to say all those in favor, but you have to take the roll on this. Clerk will take the roll.
Yes. Fretham. Aye. McDonough.
Aye.
McGuire.
Aye.
Ortega.
Aye.
Reinhardt.
Aye.
Modis Castillo.
Aye.
Congratulations. All right. So with that, we have no further business.
So with that, they have no further business and they're adjourned. But you at least know who is going to be in charge of the Ramsey County HRA. They wanted to make sure that they got that piece of business done in their January meeting. But in this organizational meeting, there's no discussion about A, when is the next meeting going to be held? 2, what are their goals and plans for the upcoming year? What happened in the past period between August and this meeting, or any information of any kind? So what are these county commissioners doing all day long? They claim they got a full-time job and that they attend so many meetings. Well, of course they can count this as a meeting, but is this really a meeting when all you did was just sit down and say ayes all for 4 minutes and then say, well, that's all the business we got. I guess we're adjourned. Toodaloo, we're going to go off to somewhere else now.
I'm confused. I didn't see any people there. Do they post their meetings?
They do.
So the thing is, if they do, shouldn't there be some issues, especially with the housing that's being proposed in these areas, or the issue where there is I know there's a golf course where they're talking about they want to tear up the golf course to build housing there. You'd think that would have been one of the issues they had. But when is the next meeting?
And that is a good point, Mr. Bradley. They certainly could have talked about what is the current status of the Maplewood Ponds Golf Course and any future initiatives that turn that into affordable housing. But you see, they didn't talk about that update, did they?
No.
Because generally, they have their offices there at the City Hall building, the Ramsey County Courthouse building on Kellogg, and they're there all day long. They talk to each other in the hallways, in their offices, and because the public isn't there to see how many violations of the open meeting law there is, they've never been sued on it that I'm aware of.
It confuses the heck out of me because I'm also made aware of the proposals that are being made in my own city of Maplewood, including that they are talking about they want to have more low-income housing in the area of the shopping center.
Right, because of a housing crisis. Well, that leads us into our last clip for today, is that we were at the joint meeting, as you know, of the Maplewood City Council and the Housing Economic Development Commission. We've done a number of shows on the content of that meeting because the city did not cable cast it. They recorded it only for their own internal purposes, not for disclosure to the public. We had our cameras there, so we have the entire meeting film footage. But during that meeting, the appointed mayor, Marley Abrams, had some comments to make about what should they be doing about infill of certain lots and where there's lots or their properties where houses should be demolished. And let's take a look at her comments made at that meeting in November.
Housing, well, one of the things, we know that, there isn't enough housing, and that is part of our town plan and part of the big push. And what better way to address that is to take some homes that are already there in neighborhoods and look at that as a resource. And what are some things that we can do to address that?
Now, appointed Mayor Marley Abrams is an attorney. She should have an analytical mind, being an attorney and all, because half of the job of being an attorney is trying to figure out and analyze facts, figures, comparisons, and being able to craft an argument based upon that analysis. She says, we know there is a housing crisis. How does she know that? Because you see, at this particular meeting, they didn't talk about any trends. They didn't talk about the population numbers. They didn't talk about anything having to do with quantifiable data to lead and shape their public policy. Now, what's fascinating is that in some of the recent papers that I looked at over December, is that you see the same type of fallacy happening in other communities as well. For instance, Minneapolis. They did new rezoning in Minneapolis, and they essentially got rid of the zoning for single-family housing based upon the idea that there's a housing crisis. And so the type of housing that can be constructed in Minneapolis as a result of these changes is that you can only be constructing duplexes, triplexes, multifamily housing apartments, not single-family housing. And then in that same newspaper, there was an article. See, this is all these inconsistencies you can find even just in one paper. There's an article that talks about LinkedIn, talking about the jobs that will be on the rise in 2020. And so many of them have to do with engineering or cloud computing, and those types of things, which are not necessarily the types of jobs that we have concentrated here in Minnesota. And then in that same newspaper, there's another article that had to do with the projected trends of population growth in Minnesota as compared to other states. Now, in other states, it's projected that there's going to be population growths of 10 to 12% in the next 10 years or so, 10 to 15 years or so. In Minnesota, it's only going to be, at the best, 3.5% increase. So if you've got Maplewood, under the assumption there's going to be a housing crisis because there's going to be such a population increase, you've got Minneapolis making changes based on that assumption, and yet it turns out from the data and the statistics that the population growth in Minnesota over the next 10 to 15 years is only going to be 3%. Does that mean then that we are going to end up producing more housing than what the demand will be?
In fact, when you think about it, what is it we've been told on this census? That we better make sure everybody's counted because we're going to lose a politician, because the fact is there isn't many people that want to live in Minnesota anymore.
Well, and part of the reason is that people follow the jobs.
Right.
That is, I mean, you follow where you can find employment.
Exactly.
And the particular employment that is, as I indicated, it says here in this article, and this is December 29th, the Star Tribune, and this is looking at the data that's been collected by LinkedIn based on all the algorithms of all the people that are looking for jobs, finding jobs, looking for people to fill positions, and that as I indicated, these types of jobs all have to do with either cloud computing, artificial intelligence, engineering, having to do with computing skills. And these jobs, these top 20 areas of job skills, they pay annually anywhere from $82,000 a year to $143,000 annually a year. These are good paying jobs.
Right.
These are the types of jobs that people are going to go and live in those communities and work those jobs. And that's part of the reason, Mr. Bradley, as you indicated, that we see the population moving away, because what do we have here? We have a lot of other jobs that are paying $15 an hour.
Right.
And it's very difficult to make ends meet on $15 an hour.
And I think that my point was that when we're hearing about this, we have to build so much low-income housing. Is it because of other states are dumping their people into our state, or have we got to reset our priorities, or what it is? Because the fact is, we aren't seeing that growth here. We aren't seeing it, especially in the fact that there is a lot of housing that is more market rate housing.
That's right. Well, and of course, Mr. Bradley, there's also data that shows and demonstrates that many of these types of jobs, of course, are out in California, in Silicon Valley.
Right.
But Silicon Valley is losing a number of companies and that are relocating to other places because of the costs of living are too expensive out there. Minnesota and Maplewood, for instance, could be looking at how they could market our affordability to those companies to get those good paying jobs here in Minnesota.
And that's part
and
of
they're
the-
clean jobs,
Right.
they're green jobs, and they certainly are jobs that compete with the rest of the world. Well, thank you, Mr. Bradley. We've come to the end of our program.
Thank you for having me.
And viewers, thank you for tuning in this week. We'll see you again later. Bye-bye.